We're we're back to our program. I'm going to invite Elaine, our program's chair, to introduce the keynote speaker.
Thank you, Fadi. Hope y'all enjoyed the Super Bowl last night, whether for the game or the commercials or just the snacks. So thanks for coming out today, this morning for our technical sessions. And now it's the highlight of our today's program, our keynote speaker. We're very honored to have Commissioner Kathleen Jackson with us today to discuss power for Texas, reliability for the future. As engineers, we all know how critical reliable energy is to the future for our state, and we couldn't have a better speaker to give us insights on this important topic. Before we hear from her, let me share a little bit about her background. Um, Governor Greg Abbott appointed Kathleen Jackson to serve as a commissioner on the Public Utility Commission of Texas on August 5th, 2022, for terms set to expire on September 1st, 2027. She served as interim chair from June 7th, 2023 to January 23rd, 2024. Since joining the PUCT, Jackson has spearheaded efforts to improve the energy efficiency of the state's electric grid. She previously served as a board member of the Texas Water Development Board, first appointed by Governor Rick Perry in 2014 and reappointed by Governor Abbott in 2017. Throughout her career, Jackson has represented agriculture, environmental, industrial, and wholesale supply interests, including developing and implementing water management strategies for the Southeast Texas. A registered professional engineer, Jackson served as a public affairs manager for one of the world's largest petroleum and petrochemical producers. Jackson was also involved in production agriculture with her late husband, who ran a cattle operation and farmed rice. She was a member of the Lower Neches Valley Authority Board of Directors, the Texas Water Conservation Association, and participated on the Sabine and Neches Rivers Bay and Estuary Environmental Flows Assessment Program Stakeholders Committee. In August 2021, Governor Abbott appointed her to the Environmental Flows Advisory Group. She is also a board member and past president of the Lamar Institute of Technology Foundation, a sustaining member of the Junior League of Beaumont, a member of the Texas Farm Bureau, past president of the American Cancer Society of North Jefferson County, and a past board member of Junior Achievement of the Golden Triangle. Jackson received a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from North Carolina State University. Let's welcome Commissioner Kathleen Jackson.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. And, there's exciting times in Texas, and there's so much that is happening throughout our state. And it's happening, I think, in a very positive way. It's very fast change, but having the opportunity to serve and to be a part of it is, for me, kind of a dream come true. I do want to recognize my dear Nancy Klein. She and I were to work together in Beaumont. We were in the junior league together. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to tell a funny story about Nancy. So back in the day, in the early parts of her career, one of the things that she was charged with in her work with the drainage district was to call up landowners across Jefferson County and inform them that the drainage district was soon to come through with a project. And if they happen to have anything on the right of way, they might want to move it. And so one of the folks that Nancy had to call was the mayor of Beaumont, known as her lordship, Mayor Evelyn Lord, and inform her that her fence was on the right of way. Evelyn, of course, was very gracious, moved the fence, called back Nancy, let her know that it had been moved. The drainage district came through, and as oftentimes happened, their work didn't really go through or necessitate movement of what had been the existing fence. Evelyn had built another fence closer to her house, and Nancy felt really bad, and she called up her lordship and said, "I'm so sorry you moved your fence." And the mayor of Beaumont said, "That's okay, Nancy. You were just doing your job, and it'll make a good dog run." So oftentimes the things that we think are going to happen in different ways, and they have different outcomes. But I think what we want to talk about today is what we're doing across Texas, some of the things that are happening, and how we are having input along the way, how we are using the best information, the best input. We're thinking collaboratively to be able to make the best decisions moving forward. Next slide. So I want to tell you just a little bit about the Public Utility Commission and our members. We are a 5-member board, but we had 2 of our members recently retire. And today we have sitting at the helm Thomas Gleason. He served at the Utility Commission as executive director. He grew up, I think, in the PUC. I think is doing a fantastic job, and he serves as our chairman. We have Courtney Yachtman. She came from what's called OPUC, which is the Office of Public Utility Counsel. They were charged with representing the residential community, representing the ratepayers. And so together our job is to provide policy, to promote high quality infrastructure. So very much aligned, I think, with what civil engineers do each and every day. And I would tell you that from my perspective, it really needs to be about making sure as we move forward that we have good data. Because I know you've heard me say this before when I was with the Water Development Board, but the better the data, the better the science. The better the science, the better the policy. My senator is Robert Nichols, who is also an engineer. He's from East Texas. He lives in San Augustine. If you go into his office, he has a beautiful sign and it says, "In God we trust. Everybody else bring data." Next slide. So what we know about Texas, of course, is that it is growing each and every day. We have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 to 1,500 people moving to Texas, and nobody is bringing any water with them, and nobody is bringing any power with them. And the demand for power, the demand for water is growing each and every day at an unprecedented amount. Next slide. The other thing that is changing is our resource mix. And so if you look back, I mean, less than even 5 years ago, you would see that most of the generation that supported the grid was gas powered, it was coal, or it was nuclear. It formed a very, that base form of energy that literally dispatchable, so you could push a button and the power would come on. Over time, of course, because wind and solar are necessary. They're necessary parts of the overall resource mix, but they're different in the way that they behave. So they're available to the grid whenever the wind is blowing, or they're available to the grid whenever the sun is shining. But this variation in resource mix, which has changed dramatically since 2000 to recently in 2004, coupled with the increased demand, which you've seen has been a 48% increase, presents a real challenge in terms of maintaining reliability to the grid. So part of what we're going to talk about today is, how are we addressing this? What are we incentivizing the build out of infrastructure and how we want that to occur, as well as how we are managing our existing resources on the grid. So I think we all would agree that we need all types of energy. We need to have all of the above, but we also need to have mechanisms and things in place so that we can make sure that the power continues to be affordable as well as reliable. Next slide. This will give you a kind of a snapshot of Texas and where we fit in, if you will, to the bigger picture. Of course, Texas is unique in that we have a competitive market called ERCOT, which serves most of the state. And of course, the Dallas-Fort Worth area is in ERCOT. And the other parts of Texas, which, I tell people we love you just as much as we do ERCOT, although there are smaller portions of the state that are served by other ISOs. So we have MISO in East Texas, and then we have SPP, the Southwest Power Pool, in the northern part of the state. So of course, the whole function here and everything that we are concerned about is making sure that as we move forward and we make decisions, at least from my standpoint, is we want to preserve that competitive market. And so if you look at the other parts of the country, we're kind of the only one that's left standing. We're the only one that says, hey, we want to, and we've seen success in that in the past. The boom that happened in the 80s and continued on into the 90s, of where we were able to provide a very affordable power to communities. So now, and to businesses. So now we want to make sure that we can continue to make it affordable at the same time, really focus in on reliability. The next slide. So this will give you kind of an insight and kind of a snapshot into the ERCOT control room. And so I think a lot of people, when they think about ERCOT, and of course this is like, you know, percent of Texas, or 90% of the load, and then about 75% of the customers are served by ERCOT. We think of this as a control center, kind of an air traffic controller that is basically controlling the grid, running the day-to-day operations, looking at the day-ahead market, and keeping the frequency in balance. But the real product that ERCOT delivers is data. They produce data that informs the market in multiple periods of time. ERCOT produces data to help the market understand what's happening in the next 5 minutes, in the next hour, the next 5 hours, the next day, the next 5 days, and the next 5 years. So this data is critically important because it helps to provide a path and an understanding to where trends in the markets are leading the performance indicators of the market. And these performance indicators are being the economics as well as the reliability performance indicators. So let's talk about those in the next slide for just a minute. And so this is kind of how it all works. In Texas, there is a separate generation. These are formed by basically independent companies or municipalities that provide the power that goes onto the grid. It is transmitted from the generator to the area of where the load is and where the power is needed, and then goes through local distribution to meet industrial, residential, and commercial needs. So the whole concept is that we need to make sure that we have enough, and that we have enough not just for today, but for the future. We know that build out, whether it is power plants, new power plants, or whether it is new transmission, happens over long periods of time. And so we do an extensive amount of planning and build out to make sure that when the load is there and that Texas needs it, we have the facilities and we have the infrastructure in place to meet those needs. The next slide. And so wanted to just kind of brief you, and this is really since 2021, on what the work effort has been across the state and the landmark grid reliability reforms that we have made. First of all, we worked on weatherizing the fleet. So many of you remember after 2021 that there were issues associated with some of the power plants, some of the generating facilities, some of the transmission in terms of the freezing temperatures. At that time, if anybody had said we would go in and we would design those facilities to meet those cold conditions, we would say we'd look back in history. We had seen that this really wasn't necessarily the case. We wouldn't put in infrastructure to meet the standards that typically we had done up in the northern states. The legislature became engaged and involved. The Public Utility Commission, had our recommendations from our staff, and we said, really, we need to kind of do a step change here. We need to make this a requirement for all of our transmission facilities and all of our power generating centers to have the infrastructure that is capable of withstanding these cold temperatures. And as has been very successful, I think, in Texas in terms of our approach, we looked at each of these entities. We said, here is the region, here are the standards you need to meet, and then you go in and determine from a facility standpoint what those need to look like. We then send in inspectors, many of them who had worked in the industry who we got feedback from those who had gone through these inspections and said that they were very useful because these were people in many ways that were expert. They would come in, they knew what to ask for, they knew what to look for, and they also could make recommendations for, if you will, that continuous improvement. So we put the standards in place. We've made it now through 2 winters. And I think if we go back and we kind of look again at the data and at the performance, we see that many of the forced outage rates that we had seen during Uri and even before that, those forced outage rates were down. And so this process, which we had put in place, we had set the standards for, industry had come forth and made the improvements to meet those standards, that process is working. And that's one that will continue to be ongoing. So I think this is a great example of the legislature directing the Public Utility Commission that's putting a policy in place to kind of help us, if you will, kind of make this step change, which we see has made a huge impact in overall performance. One of the other improvements I think that we made, particularly after Uri, is that we heard that, you know, there wasn't a lot of good communication between the gas providers, the transmission companies, the electrical providers, TDM, those who are trying to manage an incident. And one of the, I guess, just one of the things that we discovered was the need for a supply chain map. And so that was put together, that is available going forward, and I think it's made a huge difference. I did want to point out the resiliency plans. This is certainly an area I know that probably each and every one of y'all are engaged in, possibly have been involved in. All of the transmission providers across Texas have the opportunity to submit a resiliency plan. The way that upgrades in Texas kind of work and through the rate structure is, if as a utility, as an investor-owned utility, of course you make your money on a return on that investment. And so oftentimes utilities will make an investment, particularly if it has something to do with resiliency. They have to kind of wait to the next rate case. There is a review process, and what the feedback that we heard from them is that we didn't always know whether those were going to be something that the regulator would agree with, or the other stakeholders. By putting this in place, which said, all right, tell us your resiliency plan, tell us those capital investments that you are going to pursue up front. The state then comes in. Again, we get input from stakeholders. It is, because it is an investment, it is a contested case hearing. The regulators then approve, if you will, the transmission plan. Your service provider in this area is Encore. They were the first to come in with their resiliency plan. That has been approved. And so that really kind of gives them the confidence to go in, make the investment. They know that, again, they still have to come back and prove up the prudence and the fact that they actually made that, invested those dollars, and this was the infrastructure that they provide. There is a check and balance there. But they know that if they make that investment, that the regulatory community agrees that this is an investment that's needed to be able to move forward and make the system more reliable. And so we're seeing this on, you know, physical infrastructure. We're seeing it on vegetation management, capital elements of vegetation management, going out and actually putting in hardware and software to be able to better project where the growth of that vegetation and kind of pinpoint where that management needs to be made. So I think we're making tremendous strides in the resiliency plan. Those are going through the commission right now, and I think that will add tremendously to the overall reliability of the system. Also wanted to kind of brief you on something called real-time co-optimization. ERCOT is kind of maybe the last in the country to effect this type of operational improvement. And basically what it says is that generation that is the most cost effective, that is the most reliable at any point in given time, any point in any given time will be utilized on the grid, making the grid much more efficient in the way that the resources are deployed by ERCOT, as well as making it much more affordable. And so that process is moving forward, and we are very close the end of next year and going into a go live standpoint. We're working right now with all of the entities that are engaged and involved in this. We'll be doing trials and again to affect this operational change. So next slide. one of the improvements that I really wanted to make sure that we talked about in detail. I think this makes a huge improvement and a huge difference in Texas in terms of the way that we're able to, if you will, address reliability going forward. Is we made the conscious decision to do something, and no surprise here because Texans do this all the time, something different that hadn't been done anywhere else in the country. So typically when people think in terms of a reliability standard, they think of it as one-dimensional, and they think of it only as frequency. One outage in typically every 10 years is the standard across the industry. We said after Uri, you need to not only be concerned about the frequency, but also about the duration and also the magnitude of that event. So we were directed by the legislature and have put in place a reliability standard that provides each of these three dimensions, with the frequency being 1 in 10, the duration being once in every, not longer than 12 hours, and then again, a magnitude that is being defined by the capability of the transmission system. So a huge step forward, I think, in terms of us, again, as engineers thinking about we need to define what that standard is, and then we would come back and the first time we would evaluate how the system is performing to the standard will be January of 2026. We'll say, is the system meeting the standard in each of these three dimensions? If we are, fine. If we're not, then we would step back and we say, okay, what kind of market design changes would we need to make, from a policy standpoint in terms of meeting this standard? So I think this is a huge expectation, particularly after Uri, for the legislature to make sure that we continue to provide affordable generation and affordable power for Texas, but also that we very much are focused on reliability. And I know from having a career in industry, and many of you in your work world, you know that really nothing trumps reliability. And so this is going to have tremendous impact, I think, not just for residential customers, but also for our commercial and industrial customers. So next slide. So part of what the initiatives have been, I think, in terms of market design and what we have seen that is needed across our state is the build out of more dispatchable generation. And I know that ASCE has been very engaged and involved in the infrastructure report card. This is something that the last time the report card was put forth, as well as the one that is upcoming, is to talk about this need for dispatchable generation. In other words, that one where you push the button and the power comes on instantly. It's not like wind or solar where it depends on whether that resource is available. New dispatchable generation, of course, is needed because we know there is a growing overall power need across the state, as well as our aging infrastructure. And so we're seeing new dispatchable generation. This is the 1,200 megawatt facility in East Texas that Entergy Texas, this was at their groundbreaking ceremony. This will serve the large industrial load that is in Southeast Texas, as well as Lower Colorado River Authority, LCRA's 2 plants that these are peakers. And so kind of nice to see here in the generation world and the gas generation world, kind of the 1-2 punch. So you've got the base load, or those combined cycles that are very efficient, run all the time, serve that base load, help to provide, if you will, kind of like that pulse the system needs, as well as the peakers, which can come in when wind or solar is not available, are very efficient and can be built at the same time to serve that dispatchable generation need. Next slide. So to kind of complement that, and this was the action that the legislature took during the last session, they wanted to provide an incentive. And so some would argue that it's always better to have a carrot rather than a stick. And the Texas Energy Fund was provided by statute up to $7.2 billion for a loan program, an in-ERCOT loan program. This is a 3% loan. That in combination with a completion bonus grant. The idea here was to incentivize new generation. The criteria was you had to provide at least 100 megawatts. And then there was a cap on the total that would be available to the grid of right at 10,000 megawatts. And so we currently have projects that are in the stage of we're reviewing them, we're doing due diligence, and we're very close to, for the ones that we are considering now, being close to that 10,000 megawatts of additional capacity within ERCOT. The legislature thought it was also important to do something outside of ERCOT, and so there is an outside of ERCOT grant program that's available for resiliency projects. There's no generation for generation's sake there, but there is a provision if there was a community or there was an entity that wanted to provide, if you will, kind of mobile generation to back up the resiliency of the transmission or the distribution side. There also is a part of the Texas Energy Fund that provides backup power. And the thought here was that they wanted to kind of do, if you will, kind of a trifecta. So it was either gas, diesel, or propane generation combined with solar and battery. There was about $1.8 billion that was set aside for that. We've done some preliminary work, and as you probably no surprise to anyone here in the room, that is a very costly alternative. And so something that we'll see, we're going to be putting those rules out, but it yet to be seen whether that's something that people will actually will be taking advantage of. And again, this is available to people around the state. The idea was to use that to kind of back up medical facilities and critical need infrastructure. Next slide. The other thing I wanted to kind of brief you on was the Permian Basin reliability plan. And so we talked a lot about generation, but we also know that we need transmission to get the power where it needs to be. And the legislature during the last session was very concerned about the growth in the Permian, if you will, kind of the electrification of the oil and gas, and very concerned about making sure that electrification process would be able to move forward in a very expedited way. And so the transmission planning process had historically been, if you will, kind of dictated or relegated by those entities that were able to provide signed interconnection agreements. What we heard back from transmission providers really across the state and not just in the Permian is that the load is coming and we need to be prepared for it. And so the legislature felt like that maybe a different standard than strictly a signed interconnection agreement, that officer letters were appropriate because transmission takes time to build out, and we need to be prepared, and we need to be planning, and we need to be building more. The Permian particularly, there was concerned about the import pass and the fact that we need additional 345 just to serve the area kind of locally, but also we need to have a significant import into the area. So moving forward, and this was a decision that the commission made at the time, we wanted to make sure that we didn't lose any time. There were two options that were being considered, one 765, which is very high voltage, and then the 345. And so we directed the transmission providers to provide plans for both. And then by May 1, there will be a decision as to which, based on, again, the data and the science and the input from stakeholders that we're able to evaluate to make that decision moving forward, whether the import pass and eventually the build out in Texas of some sort of potentially super highway to meet the future needs of Texas, whether that would be 765 or whether we would just hold with 345. So very exciting times again in Texas in the power world, and I think very insightful of Texas to consider this. I would say if there was an opportunity for folks in this room, because this definitely, impacts the large load centers. It's showing up, right? It's showing up not just to kind of voice your opinion, but, like Senator Nichols says, bringing that data with you. So very much an opportunity, I think, here for civil engineers and for people who just as you do care about Texas's future, to engage and become involved. Next slide. So it's whatever group I talk to, whether it is a group of 5 people or a group of 500 people, there's always somebody that, you know, the hand goes up and tell us about nuclear. And so I think very intuitive and very much of a credit to his leadership that our governor really kind of issued the challenge, formed a nuclear reactor working group, actually chaired by one of our former commissioners, Commissioner Jimmy Glotfelty. This was a year-long study. It brought in experts from across the industry. It looked at not just, you know, what would the technology look like, but what would we need to do in Texas in order to be a leader in this particular field. These are small modular nuclear reactors. As many of you know, anytime you are in the power industry, anytime you're in heavy industry, it's about managing risk. And so this is a way to manage risk differently. They have smaller footprints. A big concern with nuclear has always been the issues surrounding the disposal of the waste. Some of these new technologies actually use this spent fuel from conventional nuclear reactors, and they have fail-safe systems in there that that necessarily don't depend on actually having to take an active step. Particularly the molten salt reactor technology. The picture here on this slide is from the facility in Abilene Christian, which is looking at the molten salt. The nuclear material is actually flows like a liquid within the molten salt, and in the event that there is any sort of issue, it hardens and actually, you know, resides within the reactor. So great opportunities, I think, moving forward for Texas. Most people will tell you this is about a 10-year outlook, but the opportunity is now to not only embrace the technology, but see what do we need to do as Texas to put those things together to support the whole chain. And Texas, in many people's mind, is just perfect because we do this already with the oil and gas industry and with the technology and with the physical infrastructure that we provide, which much of that would be similar to the nuclear energy. So much to come on this. Keep your eyes open, and I'm very interested to see what the next step is that the legislature is going to do, kind of moving forward this session. Next slide. One of the things that I championed at the Water Development Board was water conservation. Of course, making sure that, you know, the water that we had and that we needed stayed within the pipeline. We had many projects that we undertook, you know, around the state to conserve water, to use it much more efficiently. The same is true within the energy sector. And although we are doing things that promote energy efficiency, there's much more that we can do. And so one of the things that we have done at the PUC is to make the various energy programs that the various transmission providers have as part of their portfolio available to customers around the state. So this is just to let you know that you can go out to our website. This is on the Power to Save website. You can click on your area and your energy efficiency programs will come up immediately. Within Texas, you know, we think of energy efficiency as the straight up, you know, keeping that capsule, if you will, you know, better insulation, kind of holding that energy in that is needed in order to provide useful work. We also look at in terms of demand response. And so I think we'll see going forward a lot more in terms of smart thermostats, the ability for the grid, if we will, to utilize that, whether it is distributed energy resources, whether it is a residential home. Again, thinking about ways that we can use that demand response to better, to help the system as a whole. So right now, oftentimes it's used for providers to actually hedge the market, which is understandable. And when you have scarcity pricing, that does help. But we also want to look at it from a broader standpoint in terms of how can we use demand response to help the grid as a whole. Next slide. We do have the Office of Public Engagement, which is available, and I'd encourage you to reach out. They're available to come and not only talk with communities if you're faced with transmission line routing, rulemakings, or rate cases. And we do, and this is a living, breathing person, Mike Hoke, who is able and available to go out and meet with folks. Slide. This is, information how you can get to our website. We do have all the information in our biennial report, including some of our legislative recommendations. I will tell you that one of the things that we have in our legislative recommendations that I'll talk a little bit about on the water side is something called a system improvement charge. And so if you are a private utility owner and you want to invest in your system, you need that capital to be able to do that. There is obviously a rate process, but the whole concept was let's get that capital to the people who are actually doing the infrastructure investment sooner, put a process in place that's easy for them to document what they have done, do it in a very transparent and easy to follow format. We go ahead and be able to release that capital to them, put that in rates, and then come back in the next rate case and provide the prudence. So that is one of the things that will be coming up in the next legislative session, and I believe Senator Perry is carrying that bill. And the last slide is, again, just kind of like how to contact me. And I just wanted to end by, again, thanking you each and every day for the work that you do. You are powerful messengers. People are busy. They go to work in the morning, they go pick up the kids, they get the homework done, they get the supper done, and then it's time to do it all again. So if they have a question about reliability, if they have a question about infrastructure, they're likely going to ask you. So the time that you take to kind of understand these issues, the time that you take to comment on rulemakings or legislation, the time that you take to provide us that data that we need to make the decisions, and we want to make the absolute best decisions for people across the state. That is very valuable, that's very impactful, and that's something that is certainly, in my mind, an area where the Texas section has excelled. And I know that we are soon to have the Engineers Week next week. There's, I guess, Wednesday, there's the opportunity for ASCE to go in at the Capitol. You'll be releasing your infrastructure report card on Tuesday. But one of the things, and I've shared this on some of the presentations that I've made to national groups, is that I think the Texas section really stands out, particularly when it comes to the infrastructure report card, because you focus on what can we do to improve the grade. And there are real life examples of where you have done that, particularly in Water World, your asset management program for small systems, where you are actively engaged in helping us stand up that program to provide that human capital to small communities to get, what they needed to improve their infrastructure. So you've been a great partner in the past. I brag on y'all all the time, and I'm very, very proud to be an engineer. I'm very proud to be what I think is your representative on the Public Utility Commission. And please know that anything and everything that I can do, I want to hear from you, and I want to do this so that we can all be successful and make sure that we have all the resources that we need for Texas to grow and for our children and our children's children to have the quality of life that I think we all want for them in the years to come. So thanks for having me, and I don't know if we have time for any questions.
Been improving since the winter storms of a few years ago. It's a really good path we're on. My concern now is more of vegetation management, seeing what's happening in the West, but particularly California. A lot of those fires have been caused by electrical lines. What are we doing, or how involved is ERCOT in the PUC in making sure that the vegetation management, especially in the drier parts of the state, is being looked after so that we don't have those same types of problems here?
So I would tell you that vegetation management, whether you're within ERCOT or outside ERCOT, is a definite part of the resiliency plan. Again, it's up to the local entity to offer up what is in their resiliency plan. Theoretically, part of vegetation management should be an ongoing operating cost, right? And so part of what they are presenting is that vegetation management, that it would be above and beyond what is the normal operating cost, because obviously in the resiliency plan, if it's capital, they're going to get a return on their investment. So we want to see kind of both. We'd like to see that, you're making that commitment as part of your ongoing operating expense, but you're also thinking about what are those things additionally that you can do with vegetation management. We've had 2 resiliency plans come through so far. One of them I was really impressed with the approach that they took, which was going out and actually using LiDAR. And then also, if the term is AI or software, to actually predict based on weather and based on the type of vegetation and based on the cover where they needed to go in and how frequently to do the vegetation management. So I think we're looking for both. We're looking for, good operational support on an ongoing basis, as well as those new type of technologies to address vegetation management. The other thing I would kind of point out, particularly for wildfires, is there's a lot of focus on the pole integrity program and what needs to be done there, and there's some good work going there.
Kathleen, as a current section president, I have to rise and thank you so much on behalf of Fadi, our current Val's Branch president, Sean over here, Kimberly, everybody in the section. Thank you for bragging on us. That's wonderful. Not everybody does, nor do they appreciate everything that civil engineers do. Thank you so much. Having been involved in the report card 4 years ago, and then the subsequent Beyond Storms report after the crisis caused by storms Uri and Viola, I have to ask you a question, and it's kind of a tough question. I hope you don't mind. It would be tough for me. I don't know if I know the answer. Okay? The question is, as you know, and as everybody will remember, that particular storm event had little to do with precipitation, a whole lot to do with a deep, deep freeze. 8 out of 10 days where the maximum temperature didn't exceed freezing for a great, huge, remarkable percentage of the state geographically. So the question I have is focusing on things like dual fuel capabilities that were needed for the black start generators, insulation, and those sorts of things. Do you feel that the state will experience, if similarly stressed by nature tomorrow, would we be better off than we were during the storms last time in terms of, and use the term resilient, but in terms of people dying and people being blacked out and browned out days on end?
Thanks for asking that question, because, I mean, first off, I think the answer is a resounding yes, we're better off. The grid is more resilient today than it's ever been. I think part of that is that we recognize that, this was not an anomaly that we could ignore, right? While we hadn't taken those conditions into consideration in the past, they're absolutely, because of the impact of human life, something that we couldn't continue to address in the same manner. I think where you're going to be today versus where you were back in 2021, and this has to do with the duration and the intensity, not so much the frequency, is we need to be in the position to where we can rotate outages, right? And so when we talked about the resiliency standard, that is incorporated into that mindset of thinking, is that, we probably can't absolutely 100% and be able to afford it, not have a situation where we could potentially lose power. But we want to do it in such a way that we can rotate those to those unserved entities, and again, the standard here is every 12 hours. And so the kind of things that we focused on and the grid reforms that we put in place are all targeted towards that. And then, of course, we also know that because the grid is changing, it's not enough to just do it one time, right? We have to have a process in place. So it's operational integrity management, right? So we say, what are the requirements? We've got the grid, we've got the reliability standard. We say, what are those processes we need to put in place to meet those requirements? And then we come in and we show the evidence or the auditing to make sure over time, as things change, that we're changing with them. So I'm very encouraged by the reforms that have been put in place. I think they're strong because it hasn't just been us. It's been input from stakeholders across the state. I do think in many ways we're kind of leading the nation in some of the ways that we approach it, but we need to be. And the other thing that's really in our favor is that we're growing. And so there's so many things that we can do here because Texas is in a growth stage that other states across the nation can't do because they're not in the same position. So, um, you know, praying to God and just, and just kind of hoping that everything that we have done a long time, along the way is going to be impactful. But, I appreciate the question, and I do think that we absolutely are in, light years better shape than we were.
So much. We have a small gift as a token of our appreciation. Thank you so much.